does, right? So accessing internet, or sending text messages, looking at Facebook, etc. Anytime you're doing anything that's connected to the system on your phone, it's being collected. How does it work? Well, every time your cell phone does anything, like I said, that data is connected, or that phone is connected to a cell phone tower or a satellite, and all of the electronic communications, calls, text, emails, web browsing, it goes through the cellular network, and it includes times when you're not even on the phone, it's just on doing its thing. Like right now, my phone is just sitting here, and I'm sure it's contacting lots of cell phone towers because it's trying to figure out, am I getting new emails, am I getting new text messages, that kind of thing. And so you don't actually have to actively be using your phone in order for this data to be sent up into the clouds. Your cell phone is also connected to GPS satellites, and so every time you use maps on your phone, specifically and especially, and other apps, your phone is talking to a satellite, and the satellites are going around our Earth here, and they're receiving all of the satellite signals from all of the devices all over the world, and you can determine where the phone is based on how long it took the messages to arrive from the satellites, how far the satellites are between each other to triangulate sites. And this allows for a location determination with some precision. And the government and these companies want to tell you that it's very precise, and as I'll talk about soon, that's not always the case. So your cell phone location can be determined by satellites and also through cell towers. And you may know about this already, about triangulation, but basically every time you're moving through the world, your cell phone is connecting to a tower. And when you get at least 3 towers, they say that you can triangulate the location of your cell phone just by looking at these different towers and doing the math to find out where your phone is between them. And then they can calculate the delay between the towers to determine, with precision, where your phone actually is. So all of this data, all of the electronic hits to the satellites and all of the electronic communications through cell phone towers is maintained, okay? And where is it maintained? The Google Sensorvault. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the Sensorvault in a minute, but just understand that this is the first place that law enforcement is going to get this information, okay? How does law enforcement get it, and what do they get? Well, prior to Carpenter, which I'll be talking about in a minute, police routinely asked for and received access to cell site location information, that's the CSLI up here, through the Stored Communications Act. And I know that Justin talked about that this morning. You've heard a lot about it. In some states, they actually have statutes that talk about what electronic communication can be received by law enforcement under what circumstances. This is our statute, our state statute in Minnesota. And it allows several different ways for law enforcement to get data. But when you're reviewing your materials when you get a case, you're going to be looking for the search warrants, right? And because of Carpenter, a search warrant is now required. But pay attention to your search warrants because they're asking for a lot of information, a large breadth of this cell phone site location information. And you'll see here, I don't know if you can read it in the back, but they're asking for GPS, Wi-Fi, or Bluetooth and or cell tower sourced location history data generated from devices that reported a location within the geographical region bounded by the following latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates at the times and dates listed below. For each location point recorded within the initial search parameters, Google shall produce anonymized information specifying the coordinating or corresponding unique device ID timestamps, coordination, display radius, and other data sources. So basically, they want it all, okay? And if they're doing a Google Fence, Geofence warrant, where there's an actual fence around a location, you're going to see longitudinal and latitudinal ranges described in your search warrants. So you can see here, there's 2 targeted warrant locations on this warrant. In my case, the victims of this robbery not only had, well, basically they ran an Asian foods grocery store, and much of that business, obviously the groceries were done at the store, but all of the business proceeds and the business back end, the bookkeeping and everything happened at home. And it was this home where the robbers went in, my client and his brother went in and robbed these people and took a lot of cash. But the warrant specified search parameters or geofences for 2 different places. One, the home, and the bottom one, that was the business. So they were trying to get data for not only the information surrounding the robbery itself at the home, but also at the same time for the business, because they thought, well, maybe they're being robbed at the same time, although there was no evidence of that. So within these geofences, within this latitudinal and longitudinal fence, they want all of the cell phone data. And what is that, my friends? It's a fishing expedition, right? They want it all, and then they'll decide what's important, right? Because we totally trust them for that. So what comes from this Sensorvault? Well, first of all, officers are going to get a letter from the big Google, from the big G, and it's going to say, hey, this is our information. We're sending it to you. It's totally authentic, totally, guys. And everything that's within your coordinates is included in our data dump. And so this letter that they receive from Google is what they consider authentication. And you just heard about fighting authentication. I would suggest that you take advice from our last speaker to fight about that. But for your information, there should be some sort of letter from Google telling law enforcement, hey, this is what you're getting and why. So what comes from the vault itself, like what are you actually going to see? Spreadsheets. Spreadsheets, spreadsheets, spreadsheets with numbers. And you can see kind of over here where it says device ID highlighted in yellow. All of those numbers, some of them are the same, some of them are different, correspond to different unique cell phones. Okay, so you're going to get a giant spreadsheet full of all the different anonymized device IDs and then where they were within this latitudinal and longitudinal fencing within it. And so any cell phone that appears within this parameter, they're going to scoop up that data, and that's what the officers, that's what law enforcement is looking for as part of their investigation and as a result of their warrant. So what do they do with it? Well, they can't, I mean, look, there's a way that you can go through these spreadsheets and you can make a map. You can go get a list of where the cell phone towers are and you can map out where these different locations are on a big map. But obviously law enforcement does not have time for that, guys. And so what are they going to do? They're going to use proprietary software. Okay, what the cops do is they get all of these spreadsheets, okay, and then they have access to, here in Minnesota and in our district, they use the CellHawk proprietary software. There may be other companies and other proprietary softwares that do this, that do cell site analytics, but I'm familiar with this one just because they're using it in our district, and it's my understanding they've used it in many other districts too. This software was created and produced by a former member of law enforcement for his brethren in law enforcement, okay? So this was basically made by and for the police. And doing my research for this case, I went out and I looked for other types of software that could be free or that would be cheap or something that we could use to basically double check the results of this. And while I found some free software that I guess they're using in India, it was all in Hindi and that was totally useless for me. So we're stuck with what we've got here. And I just want to tell you a little bit about this software so you kind of have an idea of what it does and why we should find it suspect. So the cops are going to drag and drop their big pile of spreadsheets into this web-based application, okay? And they're going to put it in, and bop-a-bop-bop-bops. They're going to come out, the cops are going to come out with maps and graphs. And guys, we love maps and graphs, don't we? We know the cops do. We know that our juries love that kind of demonstrative evidence. And that's basically what this is for, okay? And the Cellhawk promotional materials, man, they really pump it up. They love bringing in the cops. They say that this software works with all kinds of cell phone-related data. Data sets including Celebrite reports, that's your cell phone extraction reports, tower dumps, GPS trackers like ankle bracelets. Sometimes if you see you've got your trap and trace warrants for GPS tracking monitors, they say that they can analyze that stuff and make it into pretty graphs and maps in their software. They can also take all of the phone calls listed in a specific device's history and do what they call link analysis to find connections between multiple phones. And they can use this information to reveal conspirators and associates. Okay, so they've got all this phone information and they start comparing it to other phones or looking at different devices within their fence, and they can see that phones are talking to each other and they start to see that as suspect. The software maps the locations of the anonymous devices onto the parameter or over a general area, usually a map. It can also map the different phone numbers that the phone has been calling. So how do they use this information? Well, if the cops have a suspect already, okay, where there's someone that's identified to be a potential suspect in a crime, they can get the data from the Sensorvault or from the telecommunications agents or companies, and they can throw it in the Cellhawk and come out with all these lovely graphs and maps to show where your client has been. However, if they do not have a suspect, this is where the fishing expedition comes in. Because if they don't have a suspect, they're going to ask for all of this data within the fence itself, and then they're going to slowly narrow their search down to fewer and fewer devices and then request more information about those devices. So if they see a device kind of coming in and staying for a while and then leaving, they may think, oh, that device, they came in and they were there for a while, so clearly they were committing a crime and we should ask for more of that data. And what they'll do is once they figure out a device that they're interested in, they'll review that device and they'll ask for extra data to see the travel patterns for that device itself to see if it, I don't know, gives them more suspect information. Once they identify a device identification number that they believe to be related to the crime, they'll go back to Google with another warrant, with an additional warrant, that's what you see here, to disclose the identification of these suspect devices, okay? And this is now getting closer and closer to your client. They can then unlock someone's phone number, an individual's phone number, and then eventually get their email address, social media credentials, further records from Facebook, etc., additional phone records for times and dates outside of that original perimeter. And they're basically narrowing it down to find your guy and charge him. Once they get the data, and specifically for your guy, they can generate a hot list, which shows the top 10 places that this person has gone, the top 10 numbers that they've dialed, patterns in their behavior to monitor suspect collaboration. And what they'll do is once they get your client's cell phone information, they'll make this lovely graph, okay, generating a display of the towers that the subject device has hit during the requested time and date to make a lovely, lovely demonstrative piece of evidence for your jury to show, hey, obviously your defendant was near the crime scene because look where they went. They went here, they went here, they went here. Oh, they went right to the crime scene. Yeah, that's helpful. So, what do we know about this Sensorvault that has all of this information that will show where anybody within that fence has gone or will go or has gone or whatever. Since 2009, Google's Sensorvault has collected data on users of Android smartphones and also Apple phones that access data Google or Google products. And all of that information gets swept up into the Sensorvault, okay? Any information from GPS signals, cell phone towers, nearby Wi-Fi devices, Bluetooth beacons, everything. Even if you have opted out of certain apps to say, don't follow me, if you're then using maps, or you're then using anything pretty much that connects to a cell tower or a satellite, that information is going to be kept by Google. And while I don't know where these Google Sensorvault server farms are, certainly they've got a huge carbon footprint, because I imagine they're in some, I don't know, magical desert location that seeps, who knows, unknown quantities of carbon for air conditioning and whatever. But basically imagine like a server farm the size of this room, multiple ones of them, and they're just collecting data, and it just sits there waiting to be mined by law enforcement or other commercial entities. And the Sensorvault is so vast and so unknown, since Google completely controls everything about it, that it has even come to the attention of Congress. And last spring, Congress started getting a little uptight about this Sensorvault thing, and they sent a letter to Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, and they wanted to know some stuff. Who has access to the information in this Sensorvault database? How accurate is the precise location information stored in this Sensorvault? And what controls does Google provide to consumers to limit or revoke their access to this information? And while there was additional questions, I think ones that we would be asking would be, how do we know that this isn't hackable? How do we know that the people that are running this don't have some sort of bias, or that there's some sort of inherent bias automatically created into the algorithms themselves? There are no verification studies. There's no reliability studies. It's just Google gives the cops this information, and they put it in their special program, and then out comes this lovely map showing that your client was right at the crime scene, right at the right time. Things to know about cell data records analysis. So here's where we can start really putting the screws to this information. First of all, location data is never exact. They're going to tell you that it is, but it's not. And that has to do with the nature of cell phones, how they interact with satellites and cell towers themselves. Your cell phone is trying to connect to the tower with the strongest and highest quality signal at any given moment, not the closest. The actual determination of which cell tower your phone is actually using is not listed in the records that are provided to law enforcement or to you through discovery. So they just want to have you trust that it's all okay. There's no data for why your phone used one tower and not another. And a lot of these spreadsheets, they'll only have data for certain towers and not others. And so sometimes you'll see a phone hitting a cell tower and it looks like it's close to something, but it's actually a borrowed cell tower from another company, and really you were in a different place, and your phone just happened to catch that tower because it had the strongest signal or beam width. If the nearest cell tower is busy, even if it's pretty strong, if it's overwhelmed by calls, then your cell phone is probably going to pick up a different tower, and that will change the precision logistics. The maps that law enforcement uses, especially in this CellHawk stuff, these are misleading. They want you to think that every cell tower has this lovely pie-shaped radius, okay, where it looks like a little piece from, what is it, Trivial Pursuit, right? But in reality, here's what it is. Each cell tower that you see has basically 3 faces to it, okay, 3 antennae. And each one of these antennae has its own configuration, okay? And sometimes it's directed by the company, sometimes it's directed, I guess, by just its internal, I don't know, information or whatever. But different sides of the antennas have different beam widths, they have different strengths. They're basically configured to get as much traction or as much cell phone traffic as they can. And so while the cell hawk will have the cell tower, you know, broadcasting in this lovely pie-shaped shape, in reality, the location can actually go far out into different directions. And think about basically a cell tower, say, on the beach in San Diego, okay? It's got 3 sides. One side faces the ocean. The other 2 face very populated areas. That cell tower is going to have more power and more beam width for the populated areas than it does for the one that's basically facing the ocean, right? And so think about that when you're thinking about other towers too in different locations, because where your cell phone is hitting, it could be hitting the antenna of a powerful tower, but there are other sides of that tower too, and there are other towers, and some are configured to be able to hold more data than others just by its configuration and where it's located on the ground. Okay, so because there's differences in the configuration and the actual bandwidth and beam width of cell towers, it's not the perfect precision location creating mechanism that law enforcement wants you to think it is, or wants our juries to think it is. So just keep that in mind. And in my materials, there's some more information about how to attack the actual cell towers themselves.